Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Research Labs show. Today, we're lucky to have Esther with us on the show. She's from Singapore, an established product designer, currently working at Shopify, while having previously worked at startups, tech companies, government organizations, and nonprofits as well. All possible kinds of organizations you could possibly imagine in one career. So, yeah, drum rolls, please. Let's welcome Esther on the show. Hi, how have you been?
Thanks for having me here. Yeah, it's been a busy day, but I'm just happy to be here and happy to be chatting about design.
Wow. Let's get started with how your product journey looks like. Can we share with our audience?
It depends on how far back we go, right? Like the first time I was ever interested in design was when I started playing a game called Neopets. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Basically, it's like a virtual pet gaming site, and then there is a page that you can kind of customize on your own, and then you can do things like modify HTML or CSS, front end coding type work. So then that just kind of got me interested a little bit into what code or design could do to change the perception on something on the web. And then fast forward later on, I took engineering and was able to land first-hand experience in interning in Alibaba in China. So that really kind of was my first foray into UX and product design. And yeah, I just really liked the idea of being able to apply design and affect like people at scale almost, right? And after that, I think uh, fast forward, I graduated. I took a kind of job in consultancy in IBM. I think that's where I really kind of learned how design is applied to all these different industries. And even though we might not have the domain knowledge, it's design is like a powerful tool that can bring people together to get them kind of creative and just kind of get conversations started in a very intentional way. The Research Labs podcast by Sunday Pajamas. Yeah, and then all these different forays into different types of organizations, startups, and nonprofits just opened my eyes to like the different contexts that design can bring in. And because of that interest, I went to take a master's in design for social innovation. So that introduces that complexity and also introduces a bit more of designing for relationships and designing for very connection based environments. And I think that's everything culminates into where I am today in Shopify. Yeah, where we are designing commerce-based experience.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So recently you've been meeting a lot of people, mentoring them and sharing your journey with them and helping them learn through your journey. So how has it been and what are some common observations that you see with people starting there or transitioning into like a design career? What do you think people are up to?
Yeah, I think from talking to people who are new to UX, I think what's easy to grasp onto are like the jargon or like the programming kind of things that you need to learn, right? So that's where people would start like, oh, what are the hard skills that I should pick up? Like, do you think this course is good or not? And that's a common where place people start, and I don't fault them for it because that's where like people would think it's like where the foundations would lie. But I think what I try to kind of encourage people to think deeper is to already start thinking of where they have already applied design in their own lives and how those experiences can also be built up into um, how they would want to kind of sell themselves as a potential designer to a potential employer, and then also to kind of position themselves in a more value based way. Because like rather than seeing themselves as just a designer, like with a job title called design, seeing how they can apply design based values or sensibilities to who they are and their personality, and the other way around, right? Bring themselves into the work as well. And yeah, seeing how they can be able to connect with like a company's own mission or values based on that as well. So yeah, usually I kind of like try to dig a little bit deeper as well, like asking them why is some like design something that they're interested in. And I think it's quite common. Like people a lot of times come into design because they have this like dreamy thought of wanting to impact the world in a positive way, and that's I feel is something that connects us. And yeah, just trying to push it further as well to see what is it that really connects to them on a deeper level.
Right. What are some common questions that you get asked a lot?
So most people are very interested in portfolio reviews, and so that's like a lot of the kind of things I support kind of new designers into. Some more general questions that they ask would be like, is it better to join a consultancy or like in-house? I think that's like a common thing. And then another thing could be also like how do I get my first job in UX? I think because the industry is, I guess, more and more saturated now, it's harder to, yeah, stand out as a candidate. So,
I think from what you shared regarding you coming from an engineering background, how important you think is to understand the engineering side of things to be able to be a better designer? Because a lot of people get directly into design, which is great, but sometimes it would to collaborate better with uh, the fellow team members like developers, product managers. How handy do you think your engineering understanding comes into play? So could you share a little bit more of that?
well, I did take a more engineering in the like hardware engineering, or I did systems engineering, so it's less of the software part of things. But I did feel that the engineering thinking or like the logical, analytical, like more kind of I guess left brain kind of thinking was helpful to kind of almost connect with developers on a more intrinsic level, because like understanding that they think in like more of a logical flow based model rather than I guess how we are centered as designers would be on like human needs and like behaviors. So that's one layer, and the second layer is kind of being able to speak their language or collaboratively think through a problem. So I would say that it really is a step up for designers to be able to understand languages around most technical based things like API or even like a bit of front end, so that they are able to translate some of what they are thinking about in terms of design into the product itself. But I feel that going full on to be able to kind of maybe code out an entire app by yourself is probably not, yeah, not necessary in a sense, because for a moment I was always thinking about like whether I should kind of go really deep into coding. But I realized that I mean I wouldn't be able to do it as well as a developer anyway. So it's really like how can I use design, or like how can design be a catalyst or some of this facilitation kind of be a facilitative tool to carry off these conversations. Yeah. Like just yesterday, I was able to just kind of think through a problem with a developer, because he was like saying how, oh, if you can't do this first, then we can't do that. And then there will be an error. But then I was thinking to him, why don't you just like kind of flip the logic so then we won't have this error anymore? And then he was like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so being able to kind of like bounce off with them some of these ideas when you have a very general context, that would be.
Yeah, it really helps, right?
Mhm.
I think you working at Shopify currently. How is it going and what are you learning so far? It's been around a year or something.
Yeah, slightly less than a year. I joined Shopify as like my first foray into a fully tech product kind of organization. Um, and it's mission alignment in some sense, right? What we try to do is to make commerce better for everyone. And I think they did stand out quite well to that promise. A lot of the things that we do, I've realized is very principle based. And the principle is always putting merchant in the center of everything, helping merchants make more money. And then like the secondary kind of impact would be them Shopify will make more, but that's never like the priority. So I really kind of like relate to that, and that's also where it shines, right? In the way that we conduct research, in the way that we make product based decisions. So that's one thing I learned, like having very strong principles in order to inform the strategy or to inform certain interface-based decisions. And the other thing that I learned was like how close this thing we call trifecta works. So between engineers, developers, well, engineers, developers, the same thing, designers, and then product. There is this model whereby this team will work very closely together and make the decisions together as well. No one is kind of placed on a higher level than the other. So I think that synergy between this idea of a trifecta really works very well. Yeah, I mean, then there's like the upsides, and then there's probably like the not so great sides as well. I've realized how a product company is very much in flux. I think because of the nature of technology and being able to wanting to stay competitive, there are a lot of kind of organizational changes here and there just to optimize for the business, optimize for the way that we want to do innovation, and yeah, come out with the best things for merchants. So yeah, that was something unexpected for me because then sometimes you have to yeah, kind of adapt to some of these changes. But yeah, it's been exciting and kind of I've opened my eyes a little bit to more how like an in-house place works.
Yeah, speaking of Shopify, I think I'm very much interested in their design system, and a lot of the people from my community are as well because it has a very fascinating design system called Shopify's Polaris. How is your like day to day working with the system that Polaris is, and what is it like to work with that?
Yeah, so as you said, I think very privileged to be part of a team that just is able to use Polaris. I know about Polaris as well, like way before I joined Shopify. Even in my previous workplace, we used Shopify as our kind of what's they call like the bootstrap, and then so we would use the UI to kind of like do prototypes. I mean, we won't be shipping like Shopify products, and I think one of the reasons why Polaris is so established as well is there are a lot of Shopify apps that are building on top of the Shopify system. So then its robustness really helps to make everything on the Shopify ecosystem looks like the same thing or like coming from the same place and to maintain that cohesive experience. Yeah, so that kind of translates to everything else we use. There is a very updated Figma system, updated kind of like I think where it really shines is the collaboration between the designers and developers as well, because now everything that I do is like immediately it's able to be reflected almost the same way as it would be on the code. And there's no kind of extra effort needed to, I guess, like define the specs or do a lot of check-ins with the developer just to make sure that everything is responsive or, like maintains the design quality that we hope for. I also think one thing that is almost maybe not spoken about as much is like things around copy. So there is also a very robust kind of guidelines around how we would use copy. So things like not using ableist language. So it's very intentional, and I really appreciate that they were able to put that as a on a like additional layer on top of the very technical aspects of things. Yeah, and also the system is always evolving. So when we are designing something, like we would kind of like see it evolve, and then there will be new components being coming up. And when someone invents something, I guess invent something or like be creative, I think what's important is that yeah, it's they're not very guarded as to like, okay, this is not in the guideline, you can't use it. But they're always open to like, oh, maybe this could be a new component. Like, what is it about the old component that doesn't work? So I kind of saw it firsthand happening, and I'm kind of very intrigued by it. And yeah, just privileged to be working on a system like that and seeing it evolve. I think recently they just released like the new version, and yeah, very pretty website. And
Oh, is it? Okay. I have to take a look and include a screenshot maybe. Yeah. Um, I was just going to ask you that does the design system keep evolving? And you actually answered that. And the fact that people can contribute to it with their new ideas. So, how often does it get updated? I think you mentioned it just got updated recently.
Yeah, I'm actually not like super sure, but every time I open Figma, there's always this prompt like, "Oh, components have been updated. Can take a look." Uh, but yeah, I think the Polaris there is a very dedicated Polaris team, which I think is a luxury that a lot of yeah, like it's a luxury in a tech firm, right? To be really focused on design ops and be focused on making it like the best experience, so that any other designers can do good work on it.
Yeah. So that means it's being worked on all the time, and that's why we see it like as perfect as a product that Shopify is.
I do hope so.
Yeah. So if you're able to share with us, what products do you work on, and what are some of your like responsibilities?
Probably I'll try to share a bit more in a general sense. So I'm working in a team called marketplaces. So what we do is to support merchants to sell in different platforms. So if you can imagine on Facebook or from Google or Instagram, TikTok, right, the main channels, but also like other channels as well. So that idea of selling multi-channel has been like the main thing for merchants in, I guess, in this day and age where a lot of demand, a lot of their publicity efforts and kind of promoting their products is on these platforms. So really streamlining the way how merchants would be able to, I guess, like post an Insta story about something and have like a direct link and a direct checkout possibly as well. Um, and not just in that like pre-purchase experience, but also post-purchase, right? How we can maintain everything that is streamlined, even from different sources, how they can manage their post-purchase experiences or any returns experiences. Yeah, so these are like the main things that we work on, and it's like the mission of the team. Um, and yeah, the idea is to kind of make Shopify this like mission control for selling through multiple platforms. And then you asked about like my day to day, right? Mm, so what I mentioned earlier, there is this trifecta team that we work very closely with. I usually start the day with like a stand up. So that's usually where there is like a very short 15-minute kind of gathering, which is everyone to kind of update on each other's efforts. And then I think the rest of the day is quite scattered, just between like syncing up with the designers or developers, between maybe some design critic sessions that we would have across different designers in different teams as well, just so we can give each other feedback. And then every other week there will be things like retrospectives to just kind of see where we're at as a team. And then other rituals will be things like sprint planning. So we'll kind of like basically it's a 2 week kind of fortnightly ritual whereby we look at what's out there, how's the progress made so far, and like what we foresee as work for the next 2 weeks. Yeah, so those are like the main things around product development. And then some of the times we do have to also prepare for product reviews. So that's where we check in with the designs with someone from more of the leadership team, just to kind of get their feedback and also kind of get their perspective when it's a bit more of like a broader level, right? Or executive based level. Um, yeah, and then obviously there will be days where we kind of do research based tasks, so like a few couple of weeks on recruitment and also testing and doing development based studies and discussion guides. Yeah, so like very much similar to a day to day of a UX designer, just in the setting of a product based company.
That sounds good. Yeah, I think thank you for sharing your experience at Shopify. I wish you all the best for it.
Thank you.
If you look back in retrospect, how are there some turning points or realization moments in your career that you're like, oh, I want to do this and I'm going to do it? Um, are there any such stories like pivotal moments in your career?
Yeah, I would say a couple. I think my first moment was in when I was doing consultancy work. I used to be quite, I guess, like as you do more, you start. I got a bit more jaded because I started doing things very much into finance, into insurance, and then at the end of the day, I'll be like, okay, I'm just using design to help people make more money. And then I used to kind of have this perception that, oh, maybe insurance is just out there to kind of pry on people's insecurities about life. But I think slowly, as I tried to kind of think in a more nuanced perspective, many things that are out there in the world are there for a reason, right? They are there. I mean, they have to be sustainable in a way. But for example, back to the insurance example, they also, like the insurance agents that I then speak to during my research process, make me realize that they really care about their customers. They are really trying to set them up for success and make sure that, if anything were to happen to them, the families will be well taken care of and things like that. So this just kind of then broadened my view as to design in a more systemic manner. Design, I mean, not even just design, like society works in such a, like, in webs and flows, in different interconnected systems, the government plays a role in a certain way, as such as like the corporate world as well as non-profits, and they all contribute in a way that matters. Like if a company were to operate in a non-profit kind of way, then that would be terrible for a lot of us, because then maybe there will be no innovation. There will be, I wouldn't say that, but like a slower pace of innovation, perhaps, right? So that kind of started to make me feel that design has a way to contribute to many of these conversations out there in the world. Yeah, so that was kind of one of my pivotal moments. One other one I think could mention is just when I was working in government as well. I started being very close, interfacing with different people in the organization, which is not the product team. So people who are doing law, people who are doing policies, people who are actual kind of officers who are processing, um, I guess, applications and things like that. And I realized that when I speak to them, or after I kind of come up with research insights, a lot of these things do have a value to bring into conversations around policies, for example. How can what we learn about people, in this case, I was working on the employment system. So, like, what can we learn about employers that can fit into the system? And that's why I wanted to kind of start thinking about design being of a strategic tool, right? Yeah, and hence I kind of like started to grow in that, just like design as not just a way to design physical items or digital interfaces, but a way to design conversations, a way to influence people's minds. And I think one other one was just design as a co-creation. And that was in a volunteering activity that I did, that was with this organization in Singapore called Disabilities. So it's a social enterprise, and they try to empower people with disabilities. And this workshop that they had was with parents and their children, and the children usually would have some type of muscular dystrophy. So then we were having a workshop where it's with these things called Makey Makey Kits, and basically it's like a tech-based kind of almost like a DIY toolkit that you can make things for yourself. So like you can connect it to different sensors, so that maybe if the child touches on it, it can indicate that they are feeling hungry or they are feeling sad or happy. So like really seeing how the parents were getting their hands dirty in a sense, and making these tools for themselves, and almost like supporting their own lively, like the way that they live life, and making it easier so that they can also connect better with their children. I thought was really meaningful. And I think that's where design really shines, when you empower people with the tools to really create for themselves. Yeah, so I always hung on to that, and I always kind of really believe that design is, yeah, is like the most, brings the most life, or almost has the magic that it is when other people, when you kind of like where the designer doesn't need to be there anymore, and people can kind of live with that gift of knowledge or creative confidence to empower themselves, and yeah, making something.
So, through your experiences and realizations, I think you got into design, and like, after engineering, completing that, and then you like, okay, I need to associate a purpose to this. So then you've started looking for things that you're really interested in terms of design, and I think that's what you shared, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of like happens almost. When you think back, it is a very cohesive, like nice story to tell, but very obviously at that particular point in time, I always remember there are place times where I kind of am confused. I'm also like not sure if this is the next path I would take. Yeah, so I think it happens for everybody. And I think one other thing, just going back to earlier questions around what people would ask, right? Like it's like, what's the destination? They're always very focused on the destination. And I think um I think at least I speak for myself, there will always be this insecurity, right? We talk about imposter syndrome, but there will always be an insecurity or that feeling that, what's the next step for me? Or like, how can I get to this other thing? But I feel that I've slowly learned to kind of be comfortable with where I am right now, kind of like indulge in it a little bit as well, celebrate what has come so far. Yeah.
Cheers to that. And I think, how often do you like think about what are the next steps, and how often you take the time to get comfortable in what you already have? But what is like the timeline like, or is it when you think, uh, when it hits you that okay, let me think about the next? So roughly, how does that?
Well, I guess for throughout my career so far, it's just happenstance that things come about. Like, or rather, I talk up to someone about certain things, and then I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. Why don't I kind of understand a little bit further? I would say this is something that like a mentor slash friend also told to me, just always keep your eye out for something. And I always have this kind of dream jobs or like kind of dream careers that I'm thinking of. And then my kind of thought process is, if they were to put an opening out there right now within my region, what would make me the best candidate for it? And like, am I prepared for it? Maybe if it's my portfolio that's ready, or am I prepared to kind of really present myself in a way that's like best suited for the role? So kind of almost like keeping my toes there. And I don't know if it's, I don't know if there is like a timeline for it almost. I think it's really just like I kind of go by a gut feel kind of process. And I think like sometimes it's also not just about career, right? It's about every other thing in the life, whether like career is the priority right now, or is it like my relationship or something to do with family. So I feel that one thing that I've also been like talking to a friend about is kind of like, don't take it too hard on ourselves. We don't always have to be like on top of everything, but also just kind of like what I mentioned, right? Like take it easy sometimes and just learn from where we are at. I think there are also a lot of opportunities within a particular company, depending on the size, right? To learn different type of skills or to even join a different team as setup. So I guess like that's not a great answer. I feel like it's kind of wavering, but I would say what's important is to kind of have almost like a quarterly or every 6 months to kind of review where you're at. So I think one thing that we do here in Shopify are like the idea of intended outcomes, which is done in like a every 3 month kind of manner. So kind of having a clear sense of, this is particular skills that I'm trying to build up here, and these are like the ways that I'm demonstrating. So then that kind of keeps that intentionality in place without feeling that like, yeah, without feeling suddenly at the end of a whole year you're not sure where things are going, you're just like confused. Yeah.
But do take you do take the time to think that through, whether it's by instinct or whether it's from time to time. So that's great. I would say that maybe everyone should do it in their own sense, because of opportunity comes in different forms and shapes. It's like, you, as you said, that you have to observe and identify them for you, like what you want and what you want to pursue. So yeah, I think that's what you are sharing.
Yeah, I think it's about like always calibrating, right? I go on job forums quite often just to kind of see what's out there, and like between this job and that job, what would be something that I would prefer about one thing here? Is it the company team size or culture? And then I always also like to speak to people in the industry, just kind of like to understand how they function, what are some of their challenges in their current role, and almost in a way investigate, right? Like be a bit of that spy into that company. Like what are the ways that they operate, or are certain design based struggles, or what kind of interactions that they have with the organization, what maturity level is the organization. So yeah, I would encourage people to do that. So then like you build intentionality around like what the kind of market looks like in terms of the job market, but also look within yourself to figure out what are learning goals or like next steps to be better ourselves. Yeah.
I think you come across as a very like aware person who likes to stay relevant and see what's going on, and keep yourself updated, which is great. If you want to keep going, what are some of your values that drive you, in terms of work, in terms of your life, and because both are in sync. It's not two different lives. So what are the values that drive you? And I think in terms of work, you're big on collaboration. So do tell us more about that, and what are the other values?
I speak about values very often when I talk to people kind of new to design as well, because I just really feel that like grounds us in who we are and how we approach things. And one of my values is to approach with care. So I do think like the word care is very different from like just being user centered, or like kind of empathizing with users, or like people that we designed for, right? Because it implies a layer of wanting the best for them, and implies a layer of kind of like making sure they are well taken care of in a sense. So that relates to things around design of interfaces that affect the users, right? So being mindful of ethics, being mindful of kind of the way that they do things, whether it affects them on a broader level, not just through the product. And then the other aspect is approaching with care in the way that we communicate, right? In terms of how we manage with people who are in our team. And I think that's where it shines in terms of like if someone's having a bad day, really like check in on them, see how they're doing, if they're a bit more quiet in conversations. And then yeah, if they're not feeling well, also kind of see what we can do to support as a team. So I think that's one thing. So then that builds that level of things that I will do say next, which is trust. So then that's like the almost like the thing that results out of the care that you give people. And just always to keep in mind like trust, like almost having a sensitivity around it. What's the trust level of the team? How comfortable are they in having more difficult conversations with each other, or are they just having it amongst themselves and not really speaking out? That's one. And then I think the other one is kind of what I talked earlier around co-creation, right? We like the earlier example around co-creation was with completely non-designers and almost inculcating some of the skills over. And a lot of the times that translates to working in UX as well. I like to bring people along the journey when, especially sometimes when we do user interviews, kind of like asking people who are non-designers, like the engineers, or in my previous workplace, it's like the officers who were in the ministry, whether they wanted to just kind of join and see for themselves. And it's really interesting to see then their transformation within themselves to be like, oh, this person said this the last time, I think we can consider that. Or like, oh, this thing is really important to them. And yeah, I really believe in that co-creative kind of way that we engage with people. I think the last one is just thinking in systems. I feel that even more and more now, there are a lot of things that can't be in silo. We've seen how like a simple social media tool can become like a nation or global issue around like privacy and data, right? And there are a lot of interconnectedness between the way that we do things. And earlier I shared also examples around how a product also has a lot of implications on policy as well as operations. So when we design, even within like a product in Shopify, there are so many different aspects of let's just say a merchant journey that is outside of the Shopify ecosystem or that digital interface. And even within Shopify itself, there are so many different teams as well that's working maybe on the same issue. So I think like really approaching our design from a more systemic way is really something to always keep in mind. Yeah, something that I always approach my work with. Yeah.
That's really commendable, and yeah, it makes the process and like working more human. Like even, and I just wonder about the result that comes out of it would be so it would be so natural, and because a lot of care and your values have gone into it. So I'm sure it would reflect on the end product in whatever you're building, whether it's a software product, if you build a team someday, and if you're already building one.
Thank you.
Yeah, that really shows. And I think that way it's more sustainable, and it's a healthy connection, conversation, and working together is much more fun if we have those values.
Yeah, if not, we just kind of feel like robots, right? A cog in a kind of system just churning out things. But we have to make things meaningful for ourselves as well. Yeah, in the way we form relationships in work or in life.
So, what plans does Esther have for herself in next? I don't know. You tell me how many.
Oh, I don't know, man. This is a tough question. I've always kind of thought around whether I would continue in my path in being an in-house designer in tech, and kind of just dip my toes in different kind of aspects. But my heart is always has been in social design. Um, I right. I just saw like this post around like a project that I was volunteering with that just was launched. It was a day hospice in Singapore, and this organization called the Care Lab. They do a lot of innovative work around the setup of the hospice. So like they even had a bar and then also like a corner for movie night and stuff like that, and just create the atmosphere and the experience to be really magical, even for people in the hospice. Yeah, so like I feel like I would probably like to jump back into like a healthcare design setting or a social care design setting um, sometime in the future. I'm not sure what the time frame looks like. I think the best scenario or like my kind of dream scenario would be able to blend a bit of my skills in designing in tech, some of these more hard skills with that setting that is around like social impact or healthcare. And yeah, that hopefully, fingers crossed, will be where I head to next.
And lastly, I would ask you three one word rapid fire questions, you may call it, to wrap up our very interesting and insightful session to talk to you. Got to know a lot more about you than before.
It's really nice talking to you.
So, a book that you're reading.
Oh, a book that I'm reading now is, I think the actual name is probably called Ethical Design. So it's a bit in line with what we've been talking about just now. It's called the Ethical Design Handbook. It's by Trin Fable. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing it. Trin Fable, Kim Anderson, and Martin. Yeah, so I think like yeah, it's just because I'm recently signed up for their workshop coming up soon, and I just kind of always kind of try to build skills around, yeah, sorry, this is more than one word, but build skills around what I believe in.
Yeah, always on the go. Second question, a place that you like to go to.
I've been meaning to go to Japan when it opens. I think that's just kind of like the city, actually not even the city, like naturey spots, wanting to go to this place called Arishiyama. It's a forest, and yeah, eat all the good food in Japan. I think that's just what I've been missing the most. And I think one thing about Japan, it has all these very fancy, interesting, unique poster designs that I always am very intrigued by.
And lastly, I think a company or product or tool that you use a lot, you admire, you wouldn't do without.
Wow, this is a hard question. I think recently I've been using Discord a lot. I think Discord because it's just like I really miss community. I used to go for a lot of in-person meetup groups in when before COVID, and now that we've transitioned to a virtual setting, I rely on community a lot, and I still continue to do it through these virtual platforms. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Esther, for spending the time with us at dinner time, night time. It feels like a prime time show.
Almost. Yeah, like late night. Thank you, Nishi.
Thank you, Esther, for your time. See you around soon.
Thank you. It was really lovely chatting with you.